Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into a fun, animated book summary review of Karen Reivich's The Resilience Factor. You know, when I first read this book, it totally hit me just how often I let tiny, minor setbacks completely derail my entire day. And look, most of us at some point are going to hit major hurdles. Maybe it's a job loss, a breakup, or just the daily grind of bumping heads with your boss. So, to figure out how we can actually navigate these inevitable storms, we're going to journey alongside our colorful cartoon protagonist today. Let's call him Stressful Steve. Steve is going to help us visualize the 7 key techniques from this book that we can all use to actively build and strengthen our own resilience muscles.
To kick things off, let's ask a really crucial question about our emotional reactions to stress, which, let's be honest, is a constant daily struggle for Steve. Have you ever felt like your reaction in a stressful moment was just totally overboard? Picture Steve literally pulling his cartoon hair out, storming around the office, practically blowing steam out of his ears over a simple typo in an email. Sound familiar? It's a completely normal human experience. Life is incredibly rich in stress and challenges. But what I found absolutely fascinating here is that the authors emphasize a powerful shift in perspective. If you're truly resilient, you won't just survive those challenges, you'll actually grow through them.
All right, let's quickly map out Steve's hero's journey for today. We'll be hitting 5 key areas. First, the anatomy of adversity. Second, building core self-awareness. Third, escaping sticky thinking traps. Fourth, strategies for creating change. And finally, mastering real-time resilience.
So let's jump right into Section 1, the anatomy of adversity, where we'll unpack the basic building blocks of resilience.
We've got to start by breaking down what actually happens when adversity strikes Steve. Whether it's a massive life curveball or just an annoying Slack message. This brilliantly illustrates key number 1 from the book Learning Your ABCs. Imagine Steve reading that annoying email at his desk. A stands for adversity. This is the exact trigger that pushes his buttons. B is his beliefs. Picture a giant cartoon thought bubble instantly popping up over his head. And C stands for consequences, his resulting feelings and behaviors like storming around the room. The absolute core takeaway here is that Steve's emotions aren't triggered by the outside event itself, but by how his inner beliefs interpret that event. The way you process an event entirely determines how you feel. Your beliefs literally shape the quality and the intensity of your emotions.
Moving right along to Section 2, building core self-awareness, which is all about mastering those crucial know thyself skills.
What's really interesting about this next phase of the explainer is how we can teach Steve to decode his own intense emotional reactions. It's almost like emotional detective work. The crucial point is that by understanding specific connections between beliefs and consequences, Steve can actually work backward. For instance, if Steve believes his boss intentionally ignored him in a meeting, which his brain registers as a violation of his rights, the direct, predictable consequence is anger. But if he views that exact same event as a future threat to his job security, the result shifts to anxiety and fear. A real-world loss, that leads to sadness. And if he's constantly comparing his own cartoon life negatively to others around him, that leads straight to embarrassment. Grasping this connection is the absolute foundation of real self-awareness.
But sometimes Steve's emotions are just completely out of line with the situation. And that brings us to key number 3, detecting iceberg beliefs. Think of an actual iceberg for a second. Most of its massive, destructive bulk is completely hidden underwater, right? Well, similarly, these beliefs are deep-rooted rules you hold about who you are and how the world ought to be, and they lurk way beneath the surface of your awareness. It takes a metaphorical magnifying glass to spot them. A great example the authors use is the deep-seated rule that getting emotional is a sign of weakness, or I must succeed at absolutely everything I put my mind to. Because these rules are hidden below the surface, they secretly trigger intense reactions to all sorts of different everyday challenges. Once Steve can identify and challenge these core iceberg beliefs, he becomes significantly more resilient across his entire life.
Next up is Section 3, escaping sticky thinking traps. It's time to break some bad mental habits.
Look, we'd probably all avoid these traps if we were perfectly logical machines, but we aren't. Humans are highly emotional creatures. Because of this, we have to help Steve navigate what is essentially a literal cartoon bear trap of cognitive errors. The book outlines 8 main thinking traps, but let's just highlight a few major ones keeping Steve stuck in the mud. Take mind reading, for instance, where Steve falsely expects everyone around him to magically know what he's thinking. Or personalizing, where he blames himself for things completely out of his control, usually leading to intense guilt. Then there's tunnel vision, where he zeroes in on the tiny negative details and ignores the big picture. Just knowing these specific traps exist helps us question our knee-jerk thoughts and develop a much more accurate understanding of reality before that bear trap snaps shut.
Which brings us to Section 4, Strategies for Creating Change, where we finally take actionable steps forward.
Now that Steve has gained this incredible self-awareness in Act 1, we get to pivot into Act 2, the actual change skills. Because let's be real, insight alone isn't enough. We need concrete skills to solve problems. This is key number 4, challenging beliefs. When faced with adversity, our brains love to fall back on our explanationary style, basically a pattern of ready-made excuses and explanations. And worse, our confirmation bias kicks in. Think of confirmation bias like wearing intensely tinted glasses. It makes Steve hold on to information that fits his negative worldview while completely filtering out anything positive. To stop repeating these useless old patterns, Steve has to deliberately put on the boxing gloves, fight his own brain, and actively search for hard evidence that contradicts his ready-made beliefs. He has to break the loop to be flexible and accurate.
And that perfectly tees up key number 5, putting it in perspective. When Steve's anxiety spirals, he tends to catastrophize about future threats, imagining the absolute worst. The best way to snap this mental chain is to separate the anxiety from the facts. To do this, Steve is encouraged to take his catastrophic worst-case scenario and compare it with a completely made-up, equally low-probability best-case scenario. Make it so absurd it makes him laugh. Imagine Steve freaking out about getting fired over that email typo, and then deliberately countering it by imagining his boss giving him $1 million raise and throwing him a parade just for his sheer typing creativity. It violently and hilariously forces his brain right out of that negative worst-case rut. By stripping away both of those extreme cartoon scenarios, the doomsday worst and the ridiculous best, Steve is left staring directly at the actual bullseye, the most likely outcome. Finding this middle ground brings his anxiety down to a manageable level that is actually in proportion to the real threat. And once he has that figured out, he can finally step out of his own head and start preparing a realistic, actionable plan to deal with it.
But of course, sometimes you need immediate physical relief before you can even think clearly enough to make a plan. Key number 6 focuses on calming and focusing. We all know chronic stress is a serious threat to our health. But what I found genuinely amazing in this book is this biological fact. The human body physically cannot be stressed and relaxed at the exact same time. It's biologically impossible. They are mutually exclusive states. When Steve is stressed out, his breathing becomes shallow and quick. By consciously practicing controlled breathing, taking deep, slower, and fuller breaths, he forcefully hijacks his nervous system and puts his body into a relaxed state. This simple physical action quiets his out-of-control emotions and focuses his mind.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, Mastering Real-Time Resilience, learning how to fight back in the exact moment.
So here is key number 7, real-time resilience. This is where Steve learns to synthesize everything we've talked about to fight back against counterproductive beliefs the exact second they pop into his head. I want you to practice this powerful tagline right alongside Steve. Picture a cartoon speech bubble popping up over your own head. When faced with a sudden challenge, force yourself to finish this sentence. A more accurate way of seeing this is, this forces your brain to instantly structure its thinking. The goal is to come up with just one alternative explanation for the situation that is grounded in actual reality rather than your initial, highly emotional freakout.
Then we have the second interactive tagline, which is your primary weapon against confirmation bias. Fill in the blank. That's not true because. Listen, your anxiety hates facts. By requiring concrete, highly specific evidence to test the accuracy of your immediate negative beliefs, you completely shatter that confirmation bias. And the more concrete and detailed your evidence is when you finish the sentence, the faster and more effective your real-time response is going to be.
And finally, this third tagline allows Steve to immediately identify reality and take one concrete step forward. A more likely outcome is blank, and I can blank to deal with it. Using these 3 taglines is an absolutely fantastic way to practice real-time resilience. Practicing this is exactly how Steve finally takes control of his own cartoon narrative, stepping forward into reality and drastically building that resilience muscle until the whole process just becomes entirely automatic.
You know, the most beautiful takeaway for me from the authors here was realizing that you don't need to be perfect. You really don't have to use all 7 keys every single day to see a massive improvement in your life. So many people find huge, game-changing shifts in their resilience after mastering and using just 2 or 3 of these skills. It's really just about experimenting and finding which specific tools work best for your personal setbacks and your unique mind.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to ponder as you step out of Steve's colorful cartoon world and back into your own life. Which of those 8 thinking traps, whether it's tunnel vision, mind reading, or jumping to conclusions, is currently holding you back from your most resilient self? Identify it, challenge it, and start building your resilience today. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the resilience factor.